Well, I think we are facing a changed world, and the WTO rule book and also I think some of the other Bretton Woods institutions, governance and frameworks haven't caught up with the new world. Yeah, and when we talk about the new world, we are talking about a world where it's not just advanced countries and developing countries. You have so many emerging economies which are not yet developed, but they are growing very rapidly. So you probably have like maybe 2 or 3 categories of countries, and in the spirit of the climate change accord type of spirit, that countries should have different responsibilities and obligations based on their capacity, right? So in this kind of situation, then take something like the WTO, where right now we only have developed and developing. The question is, how do we have emerging economies which are growing at a much faster rate than other developing countries, and rapidly catching up with the developed countries? What is their greater responsibility, and how should we be treating the special and differential treatment clause, which is often embedded in a lot of these trade agreements? Should we be modifying it or not? And I think another thing that has happened in just prior to the WTO being created, and since the WTO has been created, and in the lead up to the Doha negotiations, developing countries have actually become more proactive instead of just being passive and taking what the advanced countries think should be in the agreement, should be negotiated. And actually that's part of the problem why the Doha round of negotiations also was very difficult to come to an agreement, and it is, in a way, it's still stalled now, right? Because you have so many countries trying to come to a consensus. So I think the other question would be, how much of a consensus member-driven system should you have in the WTO? Should we be thinking more about having the Secretariat be able to table proposals instead of just waiting for members to come to a consensus on issues and proposals? Because if you do that, then you're already out of date with a lot of the new issues that we are facing in trade. How should we change that? Okay, so then you go into the third area, which is the new issues. The new issues that trade the trade rule book has not caught up with are trade in services, the fact that we have technological disruption affecting the way we produce, the way we trade, the way we consume, the way we behave. We are talking about data flows, and data flows is nowhere in any of the Bretton Woods organizations, even though I think we are in Bali at the World Bank annual meetings. There was a fintech agenda launched here, with the idea, okay, how do we deal with financial flows that are going through this digital payment system that are going cross-border? I think that it's a totally new world, and that issue has not really been dealt with at all in the WTO, let alone environment, labor, industrial subsidies, intellectual property rights. There are many issues that the trade rule book hasn't caught up with. So how should we deal with this? There should be a more accelerated agenda, and if some of these issues are very difficult, for instance, like industrial subsidies or state-owned enterprises or services, going further and deeper on services. So maybe you can think about not a consensus, not everybody has to agree. How about a plurilateral system where a core group of countries can come to an agreement while waiting for the others to be able to come on board? And then you have to think about, should this be made, okay, it's plurilateral, we agree first and then we make it open to everybody, or we don't make it open to everybody. Then all these discussions. But the final and most important issue, which I've kept to the last because it's the most difficult one, is the fact that the advanced countries, especially one country, the US, which has been the main proponent of the last 75 years of keeping a rules-based and open trading system and contributing more than their national commitment, if you like, to the global public good, which is called an open rules-based trading system, which has been so beneficial to the whole world, especially to developing countries, is now the main danger of wrecking this rules-based open trading system. And how we deal with the US-China trade conflict, because if you go back to the history of the creation of these Bretton Woods institutions, starting with the GATT, it was to prevent trade conflicts from going into a tit-for-tat trade war, which is what we are seeing right now. It's really very very depressing or distressing, I should say, to see that an issue we thought had gone away 75 years ago is coming back again. And we had thought that the dispute settlement system was created to prevent such things from happening. But here we are, where the U.S. doesn't seem to believe that we could settle the conflict through the existing external-based rules and dispute settlement processes. So I think this is probably the major issue as to how should we be dealing with this trade conflict. We would hope, I would hope, and in my essay I will write this as a message, that one would hope that the US and China, and hopefully with some other countries, can be like-minded and take a leadership role to find a solution to this trade conflict. And if the US is having issues with China that is going beyond its trade deficit, then we should address it. It's better to address it in the WTO rather than bilaterally. And the US has mentioned the issues about non-market economy, about industrial subsidies, about technological transfers, about IPR. These are issues, by the way, which I just mentioned earlier, were issues that we know have to be reformed even before President Trump became president. So it was due for reform. So we would rather that these reforms and the discussion happen in a multilateral umbrella rather than in a bilateral and unilateral way, because I do think that what the world still needs is a multilateral rules-based trading system, but one which has caught up with all the new issues and be able to be reformed to make it more agile, more adaptive, and more able to deal with today's issues as well as today's way of engagement between countries.